Hello everybody, it's Dove again. So this is the last time I'm probably going to be able to make my canned salsa for quite some time, maybe forever. So I thought maybe I would document it for you guys. And the title of this video is Canning Salsa the Easy Way, because I cheat and I make it easy and a little bit quicker than the normal. So these are tomatoes from my garden. There's 6 pounds of tomatoes here, and the recipe that I use calls for 6 pounds. This is 2 pounds of jalapenos from my garden. The bigger ones are actually from my brother-in-law's garden. There's about 4 or 5 of those. I didn't quite have enough to make 2 pounds, and so I grabbed a few from there. And this is 1.5 pounds of white onions, sorry. And this is my scale that I use. I just put the empty bowl on there first and then turn it on, and then I weigh my produce. And I don't go strictly by the recipe. I did tweak it quite a bit, but the original recipe is okay if that's what you want to use. This is what I start out with. I've been canning this salsa for several years now. This is the Ball Blue Book of Preserving, and it goes over every aspect of preserving, not just canning. They talk about freezing and everything else too. So let me show you the original recipe that I started with probably 7 or 8 years ago. It's on page 80, but this is an old printing. This is, I don't know, maybe 10 years old, so it may not be on the same page. But just look for Zesty Salsa, and they tell you to use 6 pounds of chopped, seeded, peeled, and cored tomatoes. And this is one of the things that when I first started, I did everything by the book, and even to the point where I was peeling them. And I don't do that anymore. That's why I call this the easy way, or the lazy way, whatever. It's still really good, and if you don't mind the peels, then you can do it the way that I'm doing it. And when I first started out, I was doing that. I was peeling them, but that process is quite time consuming. You have to have 2 pots. One of them has to be boiling water, and then the other one has to be ice water. And what you do is you make a little X on the bottom side of the tomato, and then you dunk them in the boiling water for, like 30 seconds, and then you take them and you dunk them in the ice water, and the skins just come right off. But that requires a lot of water, and more time than I'm willing to take at this point. And because I don't chop them anymore by hand, you can't really tell that the skins are there. I use a food processor now, and when I first started out, I was chopping everything by hand. And when I discovered that, when I first started, I didn't even have a food processor. And then, like 2 years after I started making salsa, I got this thing, and I thought, well, why don't I just do it in here and let this thing do all my chopping? And since then, my life has been golden. Like, it's so much easier using the food processor rather than chopping everything by hand. Now I do have to, obviously, I'll be rinsing these, and I'll pop that off, and then I do take the core out. So I take a knife and I just do a little circular thing, and I take the core out, and then I cut off the stem of the jalapenos. But I don't de-seed these. All the seeds go in here, and so you can make it as hot or as mild as you want. I've made many different variations. This recipe is Zesty Salsa, and so they have you using 2 pounds of green peppers or sweet peppers, whatever, and then 1 pound of hot peppers. And to them, that's zesty. To me, that's not very zesty. And so I've made everything from mild to medium to hot, and they're all good. So it really just depends on how hot you want it as to what peppers you use. You can use all sweet peppers, or you can use half and half for a medium, or you can use all hot peppers for hot. And so this time, because all I have are jalapenos, this batch is going to be just straight up hot. And these are regular white onions. You can use sweet onions, you could use red onions. And for the tomatoes, I do, after I process them, I drain them briefly, because I found that following this recipe, it is really runny salsa, especially since they only have you simmering it for 10 minutes. The very first time I made this, it was really liquidy, and I'm used to the thicker, chunkier kind of salsa, and that's what I prefer. So when I use these big garden tomatoes, I do drain them briefly, but I've made this salsa using little tiny baby cherry tomatoes, which were really sweet and yummy, and I didn't need to drain the liquid at all because they're not very watery. But for these, I do drain some of it off, and again, they don't have you doing that, but that's just something I figured along the way. And on top of that, even when I was draining it, it was still too liquidy for me, so I started adding tomato paste, and it thickens it up nicely, and it gives it a really bright red color. And again, that's not in this recipe, but if you follow along with this recipe, you can tweak it as long as you keep the measurements about the same for the vinegar and the salt. Those are the really important things. So regardless of whatever combination I'm using, I almost always have 6 pounds of tomatoes and 2 to 3 pounds of peppers. This time I have 2 pounds, and I always use 1.5 pounds of onion. And the garlic, until this year, I've never used anything but just regular garlic, but I did not grow any this year, and I haven't been to the farmer's market, and I just have been lazy this year because I'm becoming nomadic, lazy in the kitchen, I guess. And so I just get the already minced garlic, and that's totally fine. And you want to add this pretty much at the very end if you want to retain the health benefits from it. You don't want to cook garlic very long. And so right before I get ready to can it, that's when I add the garlic. And so I add 2 cans of tomato paste. You don't have to add this. If you like it runny, don't add this. And don't drain your tomatoes, just work with it however you like it. Everybody likes their salsa a different way. I don't add any hot pepper sauce. The cider vinegar I use is organic apple cider vinegar that has the mother in it, which is the floaty stuff at the bottom, and you have to shake it up really well. And then this is my organic cane sugar. It's very coarse sugar. It's not processed hardly at all. It does not have the molasses taken out, like the white bleached stuff. It's minimally processed. And for the salt, I use Himalayan pink salt, and these are the spices that I use. It doesn't really call for much spices except for cilantro. And again, when I first started out, I was using fresh cilantro. I've used basil before. You can use whatever herbs you want, but I discovered the joys of dried cilantro, and I know it's not quite as good, but by the time it's cooked down and everything's melded together, you can't tell. I mean, other than the fact that you don't have great big pieces of cilantro, which I actually hated that. I didn't like that sometimes my knife would miss some of the leaves, and so I'd have great big leaves of cilantro in it, and this solves that problem, and it's perfectly fine. I don't find anything wrong with this. I use this in my refried beans and in my salsa, and then I just use Mexican seasoning and some cumin. So I am going to go ahead and wash all this stuff and pat it dry, and then I will get back to you. Hold on. Alrighty, so all of my peppers and my tomatoes have been rinsed and patted dry, so I don't have the city water sitting on it. And As you can see, some of these are redder than the others. That's because I had slim pickings out there on my plants, and so some of them were not fully ripe. This one's not fully ripe, but it'll work. And when I use the tomato paste and everything, it kind of makes up for that. And I wanted to show you one of the reasons why I stopped peeling these is because I was getting produce from a local organic farmer, and it was, you know, some of it was blemished and everything. And in order to cut all that out and everything, it was not really feasible to continue peeling these tomatoes anymore. So that's kind of how it all progressed. You know, I went from using perfect tomatoes to somewhat imperfect ones, and then I got my food processor, and that made it easy to, you know, chop up everything so that really, unless you were really looking, you can't really tell there are skins in there. And so these are all ready to go. I've got my colander here with a bowl underneath it. It's actually the same height, so it's not going to drain while I'm doing it, but I'll just lift it up and let the water come out of it. And I don't know if I told you or not, but that's an 8-quart stock pot. When I make a double batch, which I've done many, many times, I have to bring out the bad boy, which is, you know, twice as big as this one. And so, oh, and you need to make sure that you're being careful when you cut up these jalapenos. Please wear gloves. Just do yourself a favor. The first time I ever made this, I did not wear gloves, and my hands now are so sensitive to peppers. I cannot cut them open, not even one or two, without gloves. And I find with the jalapenos that one layer is not enough. Oh, there's Luna. Say hello, Luna. Hi. Say hello to the YouTube family. Oh, there's Stella. Hi, girls. And so now what I do is I put these on, and then I put these on. And so that totally protects my hands from the heat of the jalapenos. And I do recommend it. I know some people are tough guys and everything, but whatever. Just, you know, my recommendation is to not do it. And the other thing I wanted to tell you about is if you start messing around with this recipe, do yourself a favor and start taking notes. Just write down the date, write down how many pounds of everything that you used, because like every time I've made this, it's been a little bit different almost every single time. And there's really no good way to keep track of it unless you're making notes. And I've been making it for years, so I've got sticky notes after sticky notes. And some of them I just kept going on with. So if I didn't do that, I would have probably 3 or 4 more pages of post-it notes. But whatever you do, just make notes, write down the date, and that way you don't have to go from memory the next time you want to do it. Okay? So I guess I'll try to set this camera somewhere and put it in fast motion. What you're going to see me doing is just chopping off the top of that stem, and these of course I'll peel. And for the jalapenos, I'm only going to cut them, like this is the biggest one, and there's a bad spot, so I'll cut out that bad spot. So I'll cut that stem off, and then I'll cut it in half. I'm not chopping them like I started to when I was younger, when I started doing this. And this one is so small that basically all I have to do is just chop off the top. You know, the smaller they are, the less you have to cut them up. And for the tomatoes, you'll notice, or not, I mean, it's going to be fast motion, so you might not see it, but I'm just going to cut that out in a little circle. And then if it's a small tomato, especially like this one, I'll just cut it in half. The bigger ones I'll cut in quarters. See, he's starting to crack already. This is why I don't bother to peel them, because it's just not worth it. Uh-oh, something went boom. What are you girls doing? The girls are over there doing something. And so I'll just take that core out. Hey guys, oh my god, they're being rambunctious. And I'll just cut it in half or in quarters, And then the onions. Stella's the skittish one. That made her go running. But the onions, I'll cut off the ends, I'll cut it in half, and I'll cut it in half again, and that'll be it, because the food processor does all the heavy work. It does all the fine chopping. And you'll see, you won't be able to hear it or anything because there is no audio, but it's got 1, 2, and pulse. And so I just use the pulse, and it won't do it now, but because the lid's not on. But what I'm going to be doing is just, you know, and I'll just keep pulsing. I do all the tomatoes at once, and then I do the onions, and then I do the peppers last. And that's all I'm doing. You're not going to be able to tell because it's fast motion, but that's all you're going to see me doing is pulsing. And I'm going to keep an eye on that, and when I find it's the best consistency, that's when I'll stop. And you are going to have some chunks that are bigger than others, but this is homemade. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be good. So, all right. I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'll figure it out, hopefully. All right, hold on. Okay, so I want to stop the camera, the time lapse, and show you what this looks like. It is very soupy, but you can kind of see the chunks. It's hard because there's so much water in here. There's so much juice in here. But this is I keep the seeds in and everything. Unless you are an extremely picky person, you're not going to notice in the end, and you're not going to really care. But I just wanted you to see what it looks like after I pulse it. I put the tomatoes in pretty much all the way to the top there. There goes the cats again. And I just pulsed it probably 10 to 12 times, and it shrank down that much. And so I'm just going to dump it in there and continue on with the rest of my tomatoes. This is the knife I was using. I was trying to show you guys. I just use a regular serrated knife. It works for all the different produce that I'm using. Hi, Stella. Hi, Stella. All right, hold on. Let's do it again. Okay, so I'm going to stop the time lapse. I'm not going to show you the rest of this. I just wanted to give you an idea of what I was doing. I just take the knife in at a curve and turn the tomato, and I get this little core out. And I just keep a bowl next to me that I can put all the ends in. And that's so small, again, I'm just cutting it in half. But I'm going to go ahead and stop the camera. After I do this, I'm going to peel the onions again, cut off the ends, cut it in half, and that'll go into the food processor. And then I'll do the tomato, or the jalapenos. Sorry about that. I'm in a hurry. I do cook this for a lot longer. I don't know if I mentioned it or not, but like the recipe says to cook it for 10 to 15 minutes to simmer it. And the first time I did it for like 25 minutes to a half an hour, and it just didn't have that depth of flavor that I like. So now that's full. I don't know if you can see that or not, but that's pretty much full to the top. So now I cook it for at least an hour. After it comes to a boil, I turn it down and I simmer it for an hour, just because it gives it a good depth of flavor. So again, when I'm doing the peppers, I put these on, and then I put these latex or rubber gloves, whatever they are. And you can tell they're well used, and they've been through hot. Like I've used these for about 2 or 3 seasons, and the peppers are so hot that it discolors the fingers and everything. So, okay. That was cute. I dropped it. So I'm going to turn you guys off now, and then I'll get back to you in a little bit. Okay, so I'm all done chopping everything up. Make sure that when you're doing this, you have a scraper so that you can scrape everything out of there. So the tomatoes went in first, and then I did the onions, and then I did the peppers, and you can see they're very irregular pieces. Like some of them are quite a bit bigger, and you know, once in a while somebody might get a big bite of pepper or whatever. There's red. I had some red jalapenos out there, but most of them were green. And so again, this is an 8-quart pot, and that's about how much liquid I drained off of the tomatoes. I didn't drain it all. I just drained, you know, most of it. And it looks really dry and everything, but now you have to get ready to add your vinegar, and that's going to make it really soupy. And once all of these raw vegetables start cooking down, they're going to start releasing their liquids, and it's going to get even more and more liquidy. And that's why I now add tomato paste, because you know, like I said, I've been experimenting. I've been doing this for years, and during my experimentations I came to realize that if I did not add the tomato paste, I had to cook this down for almost 2 hours to get the consistency I wanted. So again, that looks really thick, but I'm going to add the vinegar now. This is 1 1/4 cups. And again, you can use any kind of combination, whatever kind of onions you want, whatever kind of peppers you want, as long as it's real close to the same amounts, which is 6 pounds of tomatoes and 2 to 3 pounds of peppers and about 1 1/2 pounds of onions. Make sure you use the appropriate amount of vinegar, because this is this doesn't have to be canned with a pressure cooker or anything. Actually, you just use a water bath. But I stopped using a water bath a few years ago even. That's the second part of this being easy. Now I use a steam canner, which is quicker and uses a fraction of the amount of water. And so that still doesn't look too runny or anything, but this is going to change dramatically. Look at it now. This is what you'd have if you were making fresh salsa. You would add your spices and your garlic, and you would stop right now. But then you would have to eat this within a couple days of making it, and it would have to be stored in the refrigerator. But I do make fresh salsa when I don't have enough tomatoes and peppers to can it. I do make fresh salsa, and it has a very different flavor. You know, this is really fresh and crunchy, and the canned salsa is all soft and, you know, just like the stuff you buy in the store. Only better. It's very colorful, but it will become very muted, and you'll see what the tomato paste does to it too. So I'm going to go ahead and add my spices and my sugar and my salt, and then I'll add the tomato paste once it gets going. And you know, you bring it up to a boil, and then you reduce the heat and you simmer it. Again, the cookbook says to simmer it for about 10 minutes, so you can go as short as 10 minutes or you can go as long as 2 hours. It really just depends on you and how much time you have and what the consistency you want it to be. So I'll get back to you in a little bit. See ya. Alright guys, so it has been almost 45 minutes, and I forgot to tell you, when you start out you want to put the lid on it and have the lid on it the whole time. At least I do. And so it's boiling away. It's been boiling pretty much this whole time. I did not turn down the heat very much, which I normally do. So it's been at a rolling boil this whole time rather than a simmer. And so honestly, I'm running out of time. It's 9:30 and the rest of my family is going to be coming home soon. So it's quite possible that I'm not going to be able to finish showing you this in a normal way. You may just get pictures or perhaps silent film if everybody's asleep. But look how watery it is. And it's lost that bright color. The peppers are all muted and everything. But it's not very bright red right now. It's just kind of, I don't know. It looks kind of blah. And it's too watery for my taste. Now at this point you can decide whether to use 1 can or 2 cans of tomato paste, and I'm probably going to go ahead and use 2 of them because I already know that I want it thicker than that. And so over here, this is my pot of water that I will be sterilizing the rings in, or not the rings, the actual lids. And that is these right here. I'm using the regular mouth jars. I don't have my jars out here yet. I need to go get those. But you can reuse the rings over and over again, and I have. And these are all old. But when you're canning, you have to use the new lids. Every single time you have to use new lids because this is what actually creates the suction, and you cannot reuse these lids. That is a huge no-no. And so this is the other part of my easy. This is my steam canner. I'll show you the box right here. Aluminum steam canner with the rack, and it's a 7-quart, and this will hold 8 normal jars. Are you gonna help me, Luna? Yeah, you're gonna help, aren't you? Yeah, you're a sweetie. You're a sweetie. And so it will hold, it says 7 1-quart jars, but I never use the quart jars. I use the pint jars, and it will hold 8 of those. I know. So let me show you. This is basically, it's the opposite of a hot water bath. You know, because normally you would have your pan, your stock pot, and you would put a rack down in there, and then you would have a lid for it, and you would fill, you know, you'd put your jars in there, and you'd have enough water to go over the top of the jar by, you know, a 1/2 inch to 1 inch. And this is basically the opposite. So this is what the new lids look like, and they have to be softened. They have to be sterilized and softened. And so that's what this water is. It's just a little bit of water, and I do put white vinegar in the bottom to keep the pans from getting hot water or hard water stains, sorry. And for the bottom part, there's your rack, and the amount of water you put in here is like exactly 8 cups. So I've got 8 cups of water in there, and I've already put my vinegar in, and you want to go right to the bottom of those bolts there. And I just happened to measure one time, and it was exactly 8 cups. And so it goes right to the bottom of the thing. Actually, I could probably use a little bit more, but if I was doing more than one batch, I would definitely make sure there was a little bit more water in there. But I'm only doing one, and so this is enough for one cycle. And so I'm going to set you down here. I'm going to put the tomato paste in. Oh, look. Now that I'm not stirring anymore, look at that. You can see how much water is in there. It's very liquidy. Like when they tell you to simmer this for 10 to 15 minutes, I was like, no. No, that does not work for me. I don't really like salsa that's really running. Of course, you probably can't hear me because now the microphone's on the other side of the camera. Okay, so That just is all lumpy and stuff there. But it comes out really easily from the cans. But once that melts in, you'll see a distinct difference in the color and also in the texture. And so I will cook this for probably, I don't know, 15 more minutes, and then very close to the end I'm going to add the cilantro. You don't want to add the cilantro in the beginning with all the other spices because it is a delicate herb, and you don't really want to cook it very long. So make sure you get all that tomato paste off of there. And once it starts getting hot, it'll start melting, or for lack of better words, it'll start incorporating. But actually, you can tell already. Look at the brightness of it now. And it's already starting to thicken up. This is totally up to you. If you like runny salsa, by all means, skip this part. Don't add the tomato paste. Don't cook it down forever, However you and your family likes it. I'm just really particular, and I don't like runny salsa. It doesn't stick to the chips. It doesn't do anything like that. And so I just like to thicken it up. But yeah, you can tell the difference already. And it smells so good in here. So yeah, here in about 10-15 minutes, I'll add the cilantro, and then I'll give that probably another, I don't know, 5-10 minutes, and then I'll add the garlic, and then I'll let that warm through, and it'll be time to start canning it. So right about now is when I'm going to actually rearrange all these pans. I'll put this one back there, I'll put him back there, and then I'll put the steam canner right there where the salsa is right now, because this is big and cumbersome and it needs to be towards the front. And so hopefully you'll be able to see it when I'm actually doing it. But this steam canner, this is just like the water bath in that you can only use this for high acid and high sugar foods. You cannot can anything like corn or green beans or carrots or anything like that. The low acid foods, they absolutely must be canned in a pressure canner, and they'll tell you this here. And there was some controversy, especially on Amazon, for this listing when I bought it. I'm sure you can still buy these, maybe not this exact one, but it tells you that it is only for high acid foods. You cannot use you can't use it for corn and low acid stuff. If you're doing pickles, those are high acid. You can use it for high acid pickles and everything. So if you were doing green beans, you would just make dilly green beans. You would pickle them, and it would be fine. And it's got all the instructions, and it's got all the times. And basically, what I've found is the exact same time for the water bath. No wonder I don't have enough water. I spilled some. Crap. Okay. So yeah, if your book says to can it for 15 minutes in a hot water bath, you do it for 15 minutes in the steam canner. So right here you can see it says process for 15 minutes in a boiling water canner. So I will do 15 minutes in here, and as long as you do it right, it's fine. You don't start counting the 15 minutes until there is a full head of steam coming out that hole. There is one hole there, and it's really hot. You have to be super careful when you're using this, but if there's just a little bit of steam kind of piping out of there, it's not done. It's not ready. This thing has to be full of steam to where that column of steam coming out is steady and it's strong. And that's when you start timing your 15 minutes. And if you can't manage that, then you need to stick with the boiling water canner, because that's, you know, that is a little bit more simple, but it uses like 4 times as much water, and it takes at least 2 or 3 times longer for that great big pot of water to come to a boil. In comparison, this is quite short for the time. And so I'm going to put the lid back on this. I'm sorry, this video is going to be super long. I apologize in advance. Alright, so I'm going to go get my jars and I will get that ready. And normally you would sterilize in a hot water bath. You would put your empty jars down into the water and you would bring it up to a boil, and you would keep it like that for about 10 minutes, and that would sterilize your jars. You're going to do the same thing in here, but it's just going to be inside of this. And so I'll put that over on the stove. I'll load my jars, I'll put the lid on, and I'll go ahead and turn on the flame, and then the heat from inside of here, that's what's going to sterilize the jars, okay? And then, like I said, I put my rings over here in this, and that sterilizes, not my rings, sorry, I keep saying that, my lids. The rings don't have to be sterilized at all. They don't come in contact with the food. And so what I do is I put one facing down and then one facing up, and so they're not sticking together, because if you were to put them all in there like that, they would suction to each other and they would stick to each other, and that's just a pain. And this recipe usually makes 8 to 9 jars, and so I always make sure to have at least 9 of the lids and 9 jars ready. The 9th jar won't fit in the canner, but that extra one usually just goes in the refrigerator anyway. Okay, see you in a bit. Okay, so we are in the home stretch here. This is on high, and everything is nice and hot in there. There's no steam coming out yet, but I don't need this to be a full steam canner just to sterilize the jars. You'll see here in a minute that it's plenty hot in there, and they are getting sterilized. I barely have room back here for my pot, but it's on simmer, and those are getting nice and warm back there. Again, the seals are softening up. You have to soften up those seals. And this, I've already put the cilantro in about, it's been about 10 minutes. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So you want to make sure you're super organized when you're doing this. Have everything ready so that you can just do it pretty much effortlessly. Look at that now. Bright red. It's thicker. That's what you're normally seeing in jarred salsa. But again, if you don't care about that, you can cook it for just the 10 minutes that it says in the book, but for me that's just not enough. That's not adequate. This is the kind of salsa that I like. And so I've got my ladle here in a clean bowl so that when I'm filling the jars, the bowl will help keep the mess down, because when I'm ready, I'm going to slide this pot up here, and then I'm just going to fill the jars right where they sit. I'll show you here in a minute. And here's my garlic. I'm going to go ahead and add that, and then just let it heat through. And then over here, this is my original canning set. It's got the funnel and the jar lifter, and this is a tool to take off lids if they get stuck. This is the lid lifter and some tongs. The only thing I actually use is the jar lifter And the lid lifter, this has a little magnet on the end, and so when you're ready, you just pick up the lid like that, shake off the water, and then set it down onto your jar. Okay, that's how that works. And then instead of the plastic funnel, I really don't like plastic funnels, I bought this metal one, which is really nice. This did not come in the box either. This is to get air out, like especially when you're making jam and stuff. You stick this down into the jar and you kind of push the contents toward the center to get any air bubbles out. I really don't have a problem with air bubbles with the salsa because it's not quite that thick, but I just wanted to show you that anyways. That's a little tool for getting out the air bubbles. And make sure that you have a towel ready, because once you start taking these out of the canner, when they're done, you're going to grab your jars and you're going to bring them over and you need to set them on to a towel. And make sure that it's out of the way of drafts. You don't want to be doing this like in front of a fan or anything like that. You don't want to have any kind of wind blowing on your jars. Okay, he's ready. I mean, you can see that. That's not at a full steam. It almost is. Actually, it almost is. So when you're actually canning, that's what you want to see. You want to see a full column of steam coming out of there. So hold on, let me reposition the camera and show you this. Alright, so here we go. Now you probably can't see that on the camera, but I showed you earlier. There is a full head of steam coming out of here. Right now it's kind of puffing a little bit, but for the most part it's coming out of there at a steady pace. This is very hot, very, very hot, and you need to be really careful. When you take this lid off, make sure you point it away from you. Hopefully you can see that. Just hold the pan right down there, because there's a lot of condensation that's coming off of it, and you want it to go right back in the pan. So I'm just holding it and letting that water drain out, and then take it and put it out of the way. And I'm not sure if you can see this or not, but there's 8 jars, and I can't turn the camera around to show you, but there's 7 around the side and 1 on the inside. And so what I do is I take my funnel, and I've got to move my salsa up here. And every time you fill a jar, you want to stir it. So you're basically stirring it the whole entire time that you're filling the jars. And so you put your lid, you don't have to take the jars out. Like if you were doing the hot water bath, you have to take the jar out, you have to set it down on the counter, you fill it, you put the lid on, you set it back into the jar, into the canner, and then you take another jar out. That's another reason I like this canner, the steam canner, because I don't have to do that. I can leave the jars right here. Let me show you again, in case you didn't see that. I can leave the jars right here in the canner. I don't have to keep taking each one out. I can just fill them right there. And so I give it a stir. I fill up the ladle. Not sure if you can see that very well, but I hold it over this bowl so that I don't make a big mess. Ask me how I know. I've made so many messes over the years, it's not even funny. And so for salsa, you want to go up to the first ring, or the first line. And if you get too much, you just take some out. And then I kind of just shake it. You're probably not going to see hardly any of this. And then I move it to the next jar. And it's about 3 or so ladlefuls. And you do want to work quickly because you're losing heat here by having the lid off. just keep moving it. I shake it down. I'm sitting here, I'm wiggling that funnel, and I'm shaking it down, and that also helps to get the air bubbles out. I wish I had a better camera angle for you so that you could see exactly what I'm doing. And if you get it too full, just take a little bit out. If you didn't have enough, just add a little bit. But every once in a while, just give it a stir. And honestly, I can see some of the peels. They kind of curl up into little rolls. But I don't really care. It tastes the same to me. I'm fine with it. If you're picky, then you need to peel your tomatoes. But if you're not picky, then this is the way to do it because it's so much faster. That prep time gets cut down, you know, in half when you don't have to peel them and chop them by hand and seed them and take all the seeds out. So just keep moving it from jar to jar. And this is so much faster than the hot water bath. So much faster because you don't have to keep taking the jars out. You don't have to wait for a whole pot of water to come to a boil. I just, after many years of doing this, this is definitely the fastest way I've found of canning. And if you don't feel comfortable with the steam canner, by all means, do the hot water bath. If you think that's what the safest way is, then you do you. You know, you have to do what you feel comfortable with. And if you don't think that this is a good enough way of doing it, then don't do it. Use the hot water bath. That's totally fine. But after doing this for several seasons, I don't find that there's anything wrong with it. My food has always been safe. It's always been canned very safely. And actually, this last time that I made it, I had 9 jars. This is not even going to make 8 jars. So, for whatever reason, every single batch is going to be unique. And it's going to make a different amount of jars every time. That's because it's homemade. We're not in a factory here. So it's not going to be exactly the same every time. If that's what you're expecting, you're going to be disappointed. So yeah, this is not even going to make 8 jars. So this last jar I will take out. It's kind of hard to do because it's so heavy. But after I've gotten as much out as I can, I'm going to clean up these jars. And whatever's in here in the funnel, just push it down in there. Throw your funnel in there. Now, like this jar right here, you probably can't see it, but it's not full to that first thread. And so you need to kind of get down a little bit and look and make sure. And this is called Headspace. That's a 1/4 inch Headspace. And your canning recipe will tell you how much headspace you need for each particular food. And as long as it's close, you're good. If it tells you 1/2 inch though, you need 1/2 inch. If it tells you 1/4 inch, you need to get it as close as you can to 1/4 inch away from the top of the jar. Now because this did not take all 8 jars, I'll just go ahead and rearrange the jars. You don't want the jars to touch each other. These are very hot. So you need to get them spaced as well as you can. It's a really tight fit in this thing. Very tight fit. But you want to make sure that they're not touching, because once that steam starts going, they'll start kind of rattling, and you don't want them vibrating on each other. You don't really want them to touch each other. So this is how much I have. So it's made about 7.5 jars this time, which is disappointing, but that's okay. I'll let that cool, and I'll put the lid on it and stick it in the refrigerator. And the next step is really important. Hopefully you can hear me. This step is really important. You need to get a wet, clean paper towel, and you need to wipe the rims, the very top of the jar, because if there's any food, see, I don't know if you can tell or not, that salsa there. If there's anything on the rim, it will prevent you from getting a good seal. So absolutely make sure that you clean that top. Because if you don't get a good seal, then you'll have to either redo it or store it in the refrigerator. And the whole point of me canning this is so that I have it for the next, 6 months to 9 months until the next canning season. So I want to make sure that I get a good seal on every single one of these jars. Try not to get your paper towel down in this salsa like I just did. Okay? And I'm making a mess. I'm trying not to make a mess, but I did. It's not too bad though. Alright, so now you take your magnetic thing, and I'm turning off that flame back there. Closer so you can see. So I reach down in there with the thing, and I let the water drip off, and then set it on your jar. Pick up the next one, let the water drip off. These are not super hot, so I can touch them with my hands. But you can tell that it's nice and simmered because there's bubbles on there. It's quite hot enough. You don't want this to come to a boil because you could actually melt that ring, the red part. You don't want to do that. You just want it warm enough to soften that ring, and you want it to sterilize it. Excuse me. And if you don't get a good connection, it'll fall off like that. So, no big deal. Just reach down there and get it again. And you want to have them nice and centered on there. And then you take your rings and you put a ring on each one, and you just hand tighten it very, not real loosely, but you don't want to crank it on there. You're just getting it on there and then you stop. Don't get it too tight. They will work themselves loose during the canning process, but that's okay. You just re-tighten them after you take it out. But you don't want to over-tighten them now. This is going to be an epically long video, and I am so sorry. But, hey, at least you're getting the short version, because it takes a lot longer than this in real time. See, right now I can kind of touch them. But again, try to make it so that they're not touching, the jars are not touching each other. See if we can see that. That's what it looks like. I would ideally have another one right there, but Unfortunately, it didn't make that many. I don't know if you can see that. I have the camera at a weird angle. That's what it looks like, and it's ready to go. And so I'll put the lid back on it. Make sure it's seated all the way down in there. And then you have to let it come back up to the steaming point, like right when I showed you earlier. And so you can turn the flame up at this point to get it to a full steam, but if you have it that high and you have that full barrel of steam coming out and the whole thing starts to shake, you need to turn the flame down just a little bit, because when it shakes too much, that's when the glasses start rattling and hitting and everything. So make sure your burner is square on your pan. And the reason I couldn't use this burner is because it actually doesn't work, so I have to use the other three. There goes sloshing water around again. I'm a messy cook, I'm afraid. I try to do good, but sometimes I can't, and I just make a huge mess. Alright, so I'm going to let that go, and maybe I'll show you what it's doing again, but I think you got the idea earlier. Just make sure that the steam coming out of that hole is a full column of steam and it's going full. If it's sputtering, it's not time to start the timer yet. You cannot start the timer until there is a full rolling barrel of steam coming out of that single hole. And that's when you start the timer. And these get processed for 15 minutes, so that's when I'll start the timer. And I don't know if you can see that or not. It says an hour and 37 minutes. So I cooked it about an hour and 15, hour and a half. So you can cook it however long you want. It really doesn't matter. You can go from 10 minutes to an hour and a half to 2 hours. It really doesn't matter. Alright guys, see you in a bit. Okay, so my canner has come to a full steam. Hopefully you can see that okay. That is a continuous, steady stream of steam. It's very hot. You need to be really careful. But can you see that? It's not sputtering or anything. It's full steam ahead right now. So now you start your timer, and this salsa takes 15 minutes of processing. And so I'm going to do that. I'm going to run out of time to finish filming this. And so I'll just explain to you what I'm going to do. After 15 minutes, I'll turn off the flame. It's on a pretty high heat. But then I'll turn off the flame, and then in the previous clip, hopefully you saw me, I'll take off the lid and I will tilt it away from me so that the steam's going up that way and not towards me. And I'll let the water roll back into the pan. I'll set that aside, and then I will take my jar lifter and I will take one jar at a time, pick it up, and there'll be a little bit of water on the top of the jar. So I pick it up and I tilt it a little bit, and that little bit of water rolls off, and then I just take it over here and I set one jar at a time. Do not let them touch. You want to make sure to have plenty of space in between each jar so that they're not touching. And then you let them sit there and cool overnight, and then you can clean up the lids. I don't store them with these rings on because the rings can actually rust on there. So after everything's said and done, I take these rings off, and it will, that little hump right there, it will be indented. If everything went okay, that you'll see a curve there. Obviously this one's not sealed. But if everything went okay, it'll be an inward curve. And so that means it's safely sealed and you can take that ring off for storage. And then, you know, if there's any water spots or anything, go ahead and wipe them down. And then I just write on there the date or what it is. Usually I'll put hot or whatever because I mean it's quite obvious that this is salsa. And then right there I'll put the date. The labels that they used to give you for these, they didn't work out very well, so I like that they changed it so that the lids actually have a place to write the date, because the labels, you know, you'd put them on there and they're on there forever. So hopefully you can see that. I'm probably going to have to turn this into 2 videos because this is getting extremely long, and I apologize for that, but this is not fast. You can't do this quickly. So alright, maybe at the end I'll just show you some pictures of the finished jars and stuff. Thanks for hanging out with me, guys. Talk to you later. Bye. Alright, so I wanted to make one more clip. I know this is a really long video, but I have a little bit more information that I wanted to impart. And this is like actually 2 days later or whatever. So when I was done doing the canning process, and when I was taking the lid off, like I said, I took it off facing away from me so that the steam would go up there. And then I just keep the bottom of the pan right in there, and the water that forms on the inside, that'll just drain right down into there. So I just hold it there for a minute. You probably saw in the other clip. And then I take it over here and set it aside. And then I take the jar lifter, which I showed you before, this thing, and then I just take one jar at a time, and I usually have both hands free, and so I just hold the dripping jar over a hot pad, and then I just carry both of them over to my table here. And this is how I set them. This is how far apart that they're setting. You want a good, you know, inch or two in between all the jars, and so that they have plenty of room for air to circulate for when they're cooling off. So I just wanted to let you know, right when you take the lid off, you're going to hear the lids start popping immediately. Now, that's not something that really happens with the hot water bath, so that's why I thought I'd mention it. Right when these jars become exposed to the air, they almost immediately start sealing. And so I'm not sure if you're going to be able to tell. It's really hard to see on camera, but that's caved in, so that's got a good seal on it. And if you're not sure, kind of push down on each one, and it should not pop or anything. And so I don't know, this is really hard to see, but on this is a new lid. I haven't used it yet, but see, you can kind of see that bump right there. So when you get a good seal, that's going to go downwards. It's going to indent downwards. So these all sealed very well. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that, like, right when you take them out of the canner, they're going to start popping. And in a hot water bath, they normally won't start popping for like 30 to 60 seconds after you take them out. But if they don't pop right when they're in the canner, they will very soon afterwards, maybe even when you're transferring them over. And see, you just one-handed grab onto that and hold it tight. Okay, and I just, like I said, I just hold it over that hot pad so I'm not dripping hot water all over the floor. And then I bring them over here and line them up. And oh, and I wanted to explain to you the reason why I didn't have as many jars this time. It's because the last time when I got 9 jars, I used all 3 pounds of peppers that the recipe calls for. I did it backwards, you know. I actually had 2 pounds of jalapenos and I had 1 pound of the sweet peppers, but that does add to it, so that's why I didn't make as many jars this time, because I didn't use as many peppers. And let's see what else. Oh, and you can cut the batches in half. So instead of 6, 3, and 1.5 pounds, you would do 3 pounds of tomatoes, 1.5 pounds of peppers, and 3/4 of a pound of the onions. So you can see I again made thorough notes, and I did half batches. And then you can also do double batches. I've done those quite a few times, and that's okay. You'll just need a bigger pan. And then when you're going to actually do the canning process, if you do double batch, you can only get 8 jars in there, so you're gonna have to let the remainder of the salsa sit aside, but just keep a very low flame on it, and keep it hot while the first batch is processing. And then when that one's done, you can go ahead and put your jars in the canner again, sterilize them, and then go through the process again. So that's what you do if you make a double batch. And sometimes if you have a ton of tomatoes to use up, that's you just do it because you really don't have a choice. And then conversely, if you don't have enough tomatoes, and I've had to do this a few times, you can make up for it by using canned tomatoes, canned diced tomatoes, or even the whole tomatoes. You can just kind of roughly chop them or whatever. But that's what you do if you don't have quite enough tomatoes. You just make up for it using canned tomatoes. And then let's see what else. What did I want to say? Oh yeah, and if your tomatoes are really heavily blemished, instead of 6 pounds, you might want to get like 7 or 8 pounds. If you know you've got to trim out a lot of bad spots, you want to overshoot on your poundage for tomatoes, because you want to make sure that you do end up with about 6 pounds. So I don't know, many times I've had to do that, and so I would just, instead of 6 pounds, I used 8 pounds, and then that accounted for how much I had to take out of there. And then I think that was it. No, there was one more thing. Sorry. When I was doing the food processing, for just because this is, you know, a pretty big food processor, when I was doing the tomatoes, I filled this thing 3 times with tomatoes, and then when I did the onions, it only took one canister full. And then with the peppers, I had to do it twice. So, you know, I put half the peppers in there and processed them, and then did the other half. And with the tomatoes and the onions, they don't take very many pulses. They take 10 to 12 pulses. But with the peppers, because they're so very hard, I have to pulse those probably about 20 times. So just keep looking in there, and you'll see the condition of your produce, and just make it as small or as big as you want. And then this is again what I do when I'm done. I just write either hot, medium, or mild on there, and there are some water spots, but I'm not too worried about it. And then I wrote today's date. Okay, and I just use a regular Sharpie magic marker. And I wanted to tell you one more thing. This is a warning to you. If you even think about doing what I did over the years, don't do it, because you're going to ruin your pan. This is the last time I'm going to be able to use the steam canner. Remember in the one of the last clips where it was sitting over here in a puddle of water, and I said that I spilled water? I actually didn't. This thing has started to corrode, and it has a couple pinpoint holes in it, so it was actually leaking water out. I knew it was happening, but I was just trying to push this thing as far as I could, and that was it. This is done now. I'm gonna have to throw it in the recycling bin. But this is aluminum. And remember I told you I would put water in there and then a little bit of vinegar, so that made that water a little bit acid. And like at the height of my canning, you know, one night I would do a batch, and then I had more to do, so I would think, oh, I'll just leave the water in there for the next day. Well, the next day didn't happen, and then the next day didn't happen, and so it would be 3 days before I got around to making another batch. And so that acidic water sat in here for those days, and it started to corrode and pit the canner. So after, 3 years, I've used this thing 3 or 4 years, I think, and doing that, leaving the water set in there for a few days at a time, I've ruined this canner. So this is my warning to you: don't ever do that. As soon as you're done with your batch, whether you think you're going to use it the next day or not, toss that water out and dry this thing out, because you can even see, maybe not with the light behind me, but when the big light behind me is not on, the overhead light, I was looking through that and I could see right there's a hole, and I think maybe right there is a hole. So there are literally pinpoint holes in there, and the water is just seeping out of there. I can't believe it was still even usable, but the holes are so small that the leak was going pretty slow. And I think the heat and the vigor of boiling it and stuff kind of kept it contained a little bit. But yeah, I've ruined this, and the last night, or Monday night, sorry, that will be the last time I use it. It's totally gone. I mean, I could use this still as a stock pot if I wanted and use that as a lid, but that would be the only thing I'd be able to use it for. I can never use it as a steam canner again because I ruined it. So let that be your warning. Don't do what I did. Don't ruin your steam canner. Alrighty guys, I promise this is it. I'm sorry again that this was such a long video, but there was a lot to talk about and I didn't want to forget any steps, because this is, food safety and everything. You have to be really safe about it. Okay. See you guys later. Bye.